Hello everybody, and hold on a second. Hello everybody, and welcome to this first installment of Edwood Month, where we take a look at the many movies of one of the worst directors of all time, Ed Wood. So why don't we learn a little bit about him, shall we?
Born as Edward D. Wood Jr. on October 10th, 1924 in the small town of Poughkeepsie in New York, Edward has lived a pretty interesting life. His interests were, of course, reading comic books, novels, and of course, going to the cinema with his dad. An interesting fact, a few of his favourite movies are Dracula, starring the legendary Bela Lugosi, which he is a big fan of, White Zombie, also starring Bela Lugosi, and the legendary film itself, Citizen Kane, made by one of the greatest actors and directors of all time, Orson Welles.
So let's not waste any more time and take a look at Edward's very first movie with Glen, or Glenda.
The story, I guess if it actually has a story, starts off with Bela Lugosi playing the narrator, as he just explains how he's the puppet master of all things. But the main story is obviously about Glen, played by Ed Wood, who is soon to marry Barbara, played by Dolores Fuller, but he also has a bit of a secret of him cross-dressing as his female counterpart, Glenda, played by, you guessed it, Ed Wood. Now, Glenda is struggling if he should tell the truth, or hide it forever and may haunt him for his life. To start off, what the hell do I need to say about this movie? And the best way to sum it all up, I'll let Ed Wood explain his little secret.
I like to dress in women's clothing.
If you don't know, Ed Wood's mother always wanted a girl, so she decided to dress Ed Wood up in girls' clothing. What's also interesting, while Ed Wood was fighting in the Second World War, he wore a bra and panties to fight in battle, and he was more afraid of actually getting caught than actually dying. Though it's weird, it's certainly interesting. But back to Glen or Glenda. This movie is weird. Really, really weird. But the story behind making this movie is actually very interesting, as it's actually a docudrama about Christina Jorgensen, who changed his gender to a female. This doesn't actually show up until the very end of the movie, as it more focuses on Ed Wood's personal life. The acting may be a little weak, since Ed Wood wanted to make something which would be held in the same ranks as Citizen Kane. The major plus I would give to this movie is Bela Lugosi, as some of the dialogue is actually pretty interesting. I can say, this was quite a bold move for Ed Wood to do a movie like this in 1953, as this wasn't really acceptable, and probably why it was considered a bit of a flop, and also the worst film of all time. It's interesting how things have changed. There's a few examples, which include the Rocky Horror Picture Show back in 1975, and Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. I know they're totally different movies, but those are just a few examples. Overall, Glen or Glenda isn't really the worst film I've ever seen. Don't worry, I have seen much worse, but to me, it isn't as great as his other movies. It does drag a little, but it does get itself back at the right pace. And I especially love Bela Lugosi showing up in the movie. So my advice, watch it a few times. It will get interesting, but if you're not into these types of films, that's fine. It's just my personal opinion. So for now, Glen or Glenda gets a 5 out of 10. Just a little disappointing, but isn't the worst thing I've seen.
And so those are my thoughts on Glen or Glenda. One of the most mediocre movies I've ever seen, both strange and okay. So, join us next time where we take a look at something much more better and actually has Bela Lugosi in it, with Bride of the Monster.